che pascolavano su dei prati che mi sembra sono di famiglie che non le hanno dato il permesso.
Ah sì? Non credo.
No, quello che ho visto io, ne sono sicuro. Per evitare grane sarebbe meglio fare più attenzione ai confini.
Io vedo solo case vuote e prati in disordine.
No, è che qui la gente è molto attenta al suo.
Lasciano l'erba marcire nei campi. Cosa c'entra se i miei capri lo mangiano?
L'erba non c'entra, è una questione di proprietà, di parola data. Lei non deve approfittare dell'assenza della gente. Gliel'avrà detto il sindaco. Lo dico solo per aiutarvi.
Venite voi da lezioni alle mie capre, così sapranno dove mangiare.
Et demain, rentrez-vous la carte des prêts. Comme ça, vous saurez où vous indiquer.
Fai dei segnali sul terreno, fai lavorare di più i cani.
Okay, so qui la gente è molto attenta al suo. People are very attentive to what's theirs. As the goats roam freely, obviously unaware that such demands are being made of them, they live the possibility of crossing borders. Your goats, their land, the Chersoniesi use possessive pronouns as the means to demarcate ownership and exclusion. But the affirmation of ownership of private property is also phrased in ambiguous terms. While residents are concerned about what is theirs, Philippe's successive comments point out that they're not actually attentive to their property. They don't take care of it. The grass rots in the fields, he says, actually making it inhospitable to the animals that used to graze there. Through neglect, owners fail to realize a collective stewardship of their environment, substituting the interests of private capital for a true attenzione to the land. As Philippe, a former teacher, sarcastically schools his sheep to read maps for his goats, we are reminded of the arbitrary nature of boundaries, geographical and between species, in particular in a world where spaces and beings evolved together. Village people also accuse the family of being dirty, turn up their noses at animal offal in the streets, and complain that the Hero children smell like goats. Residents and tourists alike in Chersonio thus betray their fear of animalization, which according to Giorgio Agamben is a significant part of the anthropological machine that governs contemporary philosophy and politics. As villagers complain about the proximity of the Hero family to their companion species, they fret about the problem of defining the border, at once the separation and proximity between animal and human natures, a problem Agamben discusses in The Open. The villagers insist on the opposition man-animal, human-inhuman, reinforcing the functioning of the anthropological machine, which for Agamben functions, quote, by way of an exclusion, which is also always already a capturing, and an inclusion, which is also always already an exclusion, end quote. As Kate Soper has suggested, such exclusionary thinking, animals are dirty and we're clean, animals are stupid and we're smart, becomes a tool used by humans to affirm superiority. Quote, the animal is here used to police rather than confuse the human nature divide. By associating all of our lowlier characteristics and bodily functions with animality, we assert the importance of sustaining those higher or more spiritual attributes that grant us human sovereignty over the beast. End quote. Contemporary philosophy has consistently found this kind of thinking to be problematic, if not dangerous, in particular because the dichotomies on which it depends are never clear-cut. For Agamben, the anthropological machine, along with the Heideggerian view of animals as poor in world, constitutes a justification for the exploitation and the control of both non-human animals and human political subjects. Separating man from non-man represents a tendency to allow for the appropriation and control of certain parts of experience. In the case of the Hero family, as goat herders and cheesemakers accused of living too animal a life, this kind of binary thinking results in a forced estrangement from the rest of the town. Eventually, they're left with no space to inhabit. In a moment of despair, Philippe retreats to his stables and cries, surrounded by his animal companion. His unwillingness to respect the logic of species boundaries, geographic boundaries, and cultural boundaries finds no corresponding openness in the town. Thus his sorrow at the failure of significant otherness in the village is something that, in a muted but moving cinematic sequence, he shares with the goats. Yet just as Philippe retreats to the animals for solace, so do the villagers lash out against the animals in an attempt to exert what they believe to be retributive justice. In the first instance, they throw jars of maggots into the hay in the goat stalls. But things get worse. Late in the film, the villagers reluctantly call a meeting with Philippe to reconcile. They'll apologize in theory, and they'll apologize, and all will be put to rights. Yet, in a visually dramatic juxtaposition, as a silent assembly waits for this appeasement, the film cross-cuts to Philippe roaming grey mountains in search of 2 missing goats. When he at last finds them, they've been slaughtered and suspended from an archway. This brutal act makes any theoretical reconciliation impossible. As Haraway insists regarding dogs, animals, quote, are not surrogates for theory. They are not here just to think with. They're here to live with. Partners in the crime of human evolution, they're in the garden from the get-go, end quote. Perhaps intended as an admonitory symbol, the sacrificial goats are instead literally the death of what could have been significant otherness, the end of companionship. The circularity of the title, The Wind Blows Round, connects to cycles of life. It recalls the tradition of the ruedo, a tradition villagers frequently cite as a source of pride and as a symbol of their willingness to help one another out. This historical event turned collective reference first occurred during World War II, when the Chersoniesi collaborated to hide hay from the German troops. When the man recalls the ruedo, he says the most important thing about hay was that it fed the animals that produced the milk and cheese that nourished the villagers. So in theory, this circle implies mutual respect and cohabitation, a philosophy voiced in Haraway's work and one that Philippe also enunciates. Chersonio in this vision becomes a location of nature cultures in which these intricate relationships form a vital part of collective memory. But although they're part of collective memory, the ruedo's circle of inclusion is no longer a part of collective praxis. Late in the film, a tourist scout and a nostalgic former resident find that another member of the town has committed suicide under the same archway where the slaughtered goats were hung. This final tragedy, successive to the hero's departure from the town, makes it clear that the fate of the animals and the fates of the humans were intimately linked. So in Chersonio, the circle takes its other potential form, that of a fence or a trap, that, like Agamben's anthropological machine, keeps things in and keeps things out. If we return to the image of the welcoming dog at the beginning of the film, we recall that he was tied and that behind him the camera framed a cage. Although animals might have suggested the potentials of companionable cohabitation, and although the residents of Chersonio proudly maintain their Occitane dialect, we discover that, like the inhabitants of Conca d'Albero, the Chersoniesi forgot how to hear the messages communicated in a multitude of barking, bleating, crowing voices, reminders of cohabitation and significant otherness. So by way of an epilogue, I wanted to return to the concept of the ecotone. I think both Mazzacurati and Diritti are crafting cautionary tales, narratives which seek corrective to a utopian vision of agrarian past or a globalized, multicultural agrarian present. Their films, I think, point the way the need for a new language, one capable of incorporating the tensions of the in-betweenness of the ecotone without fear and without violence. The need to embrace the semiotic materiality of an Italian landscape that's less sure that it knows what Italian is, visually, politically, philosophically. In her advocacy for a narrative space for African-Italian writers, Graziella Parati argues that Italy needs a context for, quote, Italophone literature in which multinational and multiracial voices can become part of the discussion of the Italian cultural tradition, end quote. And this space should be one of cultural hybridity. It has to include all kinds of voices. The post-humanist theoretical context gives such hybridity an ecological home, allows the notion of cohabitation and coevolution to enter the discussion as critique and as possibility. In some way, The Wind Blows Round and The Right Distance's commitment to the traditional landscapes of the ecotone provides a way for us to think past a cinema of humanist purity. Near the end of both films, the camera comes full circle to something similar to the opening vision of the Alps, and in the one case, and the Po River in the other. And these landscapes, we realize in parting, we're always deconstructing that myth of purity. Marchesini almost seems to be talking about film when he asserts that pure is thus that which can be embraced in a gaze.